In our last presentation, we were discussing a question there was a general question about standards or rules that the person committed to keeping but then failed. And then they said, I'll give you an example. The example was connected to the subject of music. And we had a discussion about what worldly music is or what forbidden music is. And therefore what would be acceptable or what some people might call godly music. And so in the words of the questioner, they sometimes choose to listen to music and then they realize it's not probably the right type of music. And then they say, in fact, they don't really understand what worldly music is. So we tried to help them, and what ended up happening, at least from my perspective, is that we weren't able to offer some definitive answer to this person. People spoke about their own individual ideas or what they'd read from the perspective of Protestant Christians or even Adventists. It seemed to me that I couldn't go away from that study with some ground rules that I understood, some working principles. So I received some feedback, and I guess people have had an opportunity to think more about this subject. So I just want to revisit this, and we'll see how long it takes. So I'm not saying we're the only species on this planet that has music or creates music. There may be some primates that do that. And there are some other animals that their language sounds very poetic. But for the purposes of our discussion, I want to suggest that we're probably the only species that really has creative music. So, without discussing the purpose for having music, so if we were to ask an anthropologist, they may say it was for social cohesion. And a religious person or a Christian might say that God gave us the ability to create music for worship. And we read certain passages that talk about music, at least in heaven, if not on other planets. And when it discusses music, it's normally in the context of worship. So I want to suggest that somewhere in our, I'll call it our DNA, but in our nature, in our creation, that The ability to create and appreciate music is built into us. So I don't know if anybody disagrees with that concept. We could approach it from a different religious perspective, and we could perhaps approach it from the perspective of frequencies. Now, we're all familiar that I think all living creatures and some plants go through cycles. And almost all of them are connected to astronomical phenomena. The seasons,
La saison,
which is to do with the axis of the Earth. The month, which is the moon, and the year, which is the sun. We know that trees shed their leaves, we go to sleep, some creatures hibernate. So leaves, sleep, hibernate.
alors,
Trees change the colour of their leaves, they shed their leaves. We sleep, and some creatures hibernate, they sleep during the winter. So we know that there are some frequencies that are connected to what happens around us, our environment. You've either read that scientifically or you have an innate experience that that is so. So, you may not believe this. I may not believe it. But I may. But there are some people that talk about other frequencies. Some resonance that permeates the universe. And they suggest that if you can tap into those frequencies, you become in tune with them and you resonate with them, it can affect us. So you've all heard of alpha wave and delta waves. That's pretty much accepted science now. And it talks about waves. A wave. And if it's a wave, it must have a frequency. So the brain has certain frequencies that it goes through during a 24-hour cycle. So that's when we talk about deep sleep or light sleep or REM sleep. So those different types of sleep or waking states, human brains all tend to follow the same pattern, and each one of those states has a certain frequency that your brain operates at. And we might call that New Age. And the reason we call it New Age, because it's actually an old concept, is that religions that were not Jewish somehow in their societies worked out intuitively or through experience some of these frequencies. And what does any sensible we'll say scientist, but then we can say society. If they figure some truth out and you want to benefit people, what do? Someone? Sorry? So you spread the word, publish papers. I don't think you do that because most people don't read scientific articles. So every country does things differently. So here's a packet of greens, lettuce, vegetables. And this is a packet of fries or crisps, whatever you might call them. And some countries, because I know people don't pay much attention, they color code them. They color code. So this would be green for vegetables. And what would fries be? Yellow. I'm just going to say red because each country is different. Red is a warning. And green is eat as much as you want. So once scientists figure out some truth, to make sure that the country or the society follows through with this information, they have to have public policy. So different countries do things differently. So does everybody know what this would be? This is a plate or a food wheel, and it tells you at each meal how you should proportion things. So Canada is quite progressive and it uses this technique. Some of the more backward countries, they use this one. Food pyramid, which has been proven not to work that well. Okay, so we've been speaking about food in, we'll say, the 21st century. What do you do if you don't have a printing press? You don't have supermarkets. You don't have a central point to disseminate information. How do you get the truth, or what you think is the truth? We'll call it public policy. How do you get it to the masses? How do you go about doing that? If you don't have any of this technology. So we'll go back 3,000 years. Natasha? Anybody have any thoughts? So I'll direct you to a book. The Bible. Which book in the Bible would you go to for public policy? Leviticus. So Leviticus is the book of public policy. What do we call it? We don't call it public policy. We call it the law or religious law. So we have to understand whether it's actually a religious law or public policy. That's for another discussion. But what societies, especially, we'll say back in the day, what they would do if they understood some truth and they wanted to embed it into the social conscience, how do you do that? You don't have the FDA, the federal something. We don't have a health department. So the only thing that you have that controls society is what? That is in every village. Cedric, did you say something? The council or government. Anyone else? The church. So the church is going to be the machine that promulgates or shares public policy. And because the church is doing this, that truth, whatever it is, it gets wrapped up into a religious context. So, if we say fries or chips, this is good food, and Israel says this, and their next door neighbours, the Philistines, they say vegetables are the way to go. What will Israel forbid you to eat? Through the church. Vegetables. So you can see how this works. So let's not use plants, but let's use music. So someone in some mystical country worked out some frequency that was beneficial to humans. And if you tap the bell that was constructed in a certain way that resonates at a set frequency, and you listen to that, it does something to you. If you're a Christian and you see that, what will you do? You'll say, no, do not listen to that, because it's not Christian. It must be worldly. So this is now worldly music, because it's not the same as our music. And then you have to wait, we'll say 3,000 years, for scientists to give it a scientific name. We won't call it meditation, we'll call it what? We'll call it mindfulness. It's not gender neutral, it's religious neutral. And we'll slip it to the Christians without them realizing. I switched from music to something else. And the reason I did that is because that something else has a connection to those frequencies. So I just want to show you a mechanism by which music can, or vegetables, or food, can get connected to morality because it has a religious basis to it. So I'll just add one more food item. We're all Adventists or ex-Adventist, depending on how you identify. So what's our favourite food? To attack. Pork. So these people say you can eat pork, and these ones say no pork. And to get this public policy through, they turn it into what? They turn it into a religious law. It all sounds good 3,000 years ago, 200 years ago, but it becomes indefensible now when you start doing the appliance of science. So again, that's for another study, but I just want to demonstrate that this concept, perhaps we might call it a methodology, like all methodologies, if they're correct, they have multiple applications, which is one of the hallmarks of something being true. Because the scientific method is what? It's based upon one idea. It's repeatable. You can repeat it, it's repeatable. Because if you can't repeat the experiment, no one will listen to it. And that's how methodology works. If it only works in one situation with one example, it's not safe. And what do we call that methodology or that concept? Testimony of two, a thing is established. Okay, so we're using principles that we're all familiar with, which is, I think, actually that was not in this study, but it was another one, but that's what Magda told us to do in a previous study. To use methodology. So I've tried to do it in a very simple way. I'm not saying I've proven anything per se, but I think I've given a reasonable argument how things can become, or how music can become religious and worldly. And one of the things that people are having a problem with today in the movement, this question, the Israelites say, if you eat vegetables, what happened to you? No, if the Israelites say if you eat vegetables, you'll get ill. It'll make you sick. Now the problem is, some Israelite wants to go on holiday to Ibiza on the Mediterranean coast of Philistine. So they go visiting Philistine on the coast, and what have they got to eat? Only vegetables, because you can't get fries in Philistia. They go there for a week. Well, they plan to go for a week, and because they're on a diet of fries, they've got digestive problems. We'll call it IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. And they go to Philistia, and after a few days, what happens? They start to get better eating forbidden food. So they stay a bit longer and continue eating this poisonous food. We'll call it worldly food as opposed to religious food. And they find it beneficial. And they ring back home and they say, this worldly food isn't as bad as we thought. In fact, it might help you. And this is the problem that people are having in this movement with music. They got bold enough, and I don't know who gave them the courage, to venture into the world. Maybe they visited their childhood. Maybe they had memories from the past. Something sparked it in a supermarket, perhaps. And they found, perhaps not all music, but some music that was beneficial to them, that helped them. And they're like this person, I made a vow not to eat vegetables, but I can't see what the problem with them is because I feel good. And so what I want to suggest is not that there is such a thing as bad music and good music. I'm not saying that that's not true. But it seems to me that the model that we have for good and bad is based on this concept that I've put on the board. And I think you can all see how foolish it is. The only reason you can see how foolish it is because you think that you know the difference between fries and vegetables with respect to health. And I would argue you don't. Unless you've done a degree in biochemistry and you know. Because what you have done is you got a degree in Google. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Public policy has helped. But you have been moulded and manipulated in your food choices. And that's why there are so many diets out in the world. But you will say, but we've got a secret weapon. Councils on diets of food. And we were taught. What were we taught? We were taught Eden to Eden. Last time I checked. So our secret weapon is councils and diets of food and the Eden to Eden diet. So we can filter public policy. As soon as you do that, what have you just done? What have you just done, Brian? What have we done, Emma? We've done the same thing as here. We just turned it into religious law. You might say, yeah, but this is valid religious law, and the one that you gave was invalid. But it's still religious law. And that should get you at least a little bit intrigued. Or worried. Because of the rules that you're using. So, the subject is about music. And I want to suggest that these cycles, these astronomical or universal cycles, are true. That's why you get tired at night. Why people need lamps during the winter months. Why there's a vitamin D deficiency or epidemic across the world. These are all connected to cycles or frequencies. So if you know that, and we have good research that talks about the brain's frequency that it operates at, we all hopefully know what resonance is. It's when two frequencies come so close together they interact. All of that you learnt at high school. So now if you go to Nepal and you go to a monastery or a temple and they tell you to sit in front of the bell and they're going to bang it, and they say absorb the frequency, get into resonance with it, you wouldn't even call that worldly music. You'd probably call it satanic, I think. And yet, if you are reasonable in your thinking and look at it objectively, you can see that it's constructed on sound principles. Whatever their priests wish to call it, or whatever your priest wish to call it. So this is not like an open floodgate to listen to anything you want. But what I do want to suggest is that the way we define, we'll call it good and bad music, can't be a religious war between the Israelites and the Philistines. And if you know anything about geography and history, the point won't have been lost on you. The point will not have been lost on you. Okay, so if there's such a thing as good and bad music, our job is not so much to call it worldly or religious. It's more to try to identify some kind of rules or system by which we can know the difference between good and bad. So we built this discussion on the premise, not the proof, that built within us, because we're created in the image of God, that we have an intimate or close connection to music. That's where we started. And then to prove that, what model or concept did I use? So I said that music was innate. Is that how you spell innate? So music is innate within us. It's built within us. So that's not a proof. That's a premise or a thesis. Then I gave what I'm going to say was a proof. What word would we put here to say that was the proof that I used? Do you remember what word it was? Wasn't it the DNA? No. I said the moon, the sun, the rotation, the bell. So Karina said frequency. Yeah, you said frequency, yeah? So I'm saying frequency is the proof that this premise is correct. Our bodies have certain frequencies. The obvious one is, that you all know about, is your heart or your pulse. So we know that, but there are plenty of others. I've spoken about brain frequencies as an example. So music has frequencies. I'm not a musician, so I may not even be using the right technical terms. So when you have music and you have a human, they connect one with another. And we use the word resonance. So in a non-scientific way, if the resonance is good, I'm going to say that's good music. If the resonance is bad, it's bad music. Now we can talk about the words if we want to, but we'll leave that for the moment. So we're talking about the instrumental bit. So if we've got this far, we want to go one step further. So we've got the idea of frequencies. Good resonance, bad resonance. And then I want to take it to one more level that you all know of or you've heard of. That Magda hopefully will tell us. You. I asked Magda. She's forgotten, I think. Because she already gave the answer before. So I'm not asking her trick questions. She's already given the answer. If you can't remember, it's fine. Don't help her. You tell me, don't ask me. So, we're going to use this idea of innate frequency. And then we're going to talk about our nervous system or our nerves. So, simply put, what are our nerves? What's their job function? Someone put the hand up if they have a rough idea. Cedry. So nerves connect. What do they connect? So here's a nerve, and it's going to connect some. What are the two things it connects? Going from one to another. I'll give you a clue.
Je donne une idée.
They say all roads lead to Rome.
On dit toutes les routes mènent à Rome.
This is a road.
C'est une route.
Where do all the nerves go?
Ils vont, donc les nerfs vont tous vers le cerveau.
So the nerves connect the brain to what?
Le nerf connecte le cerveau à quoi?
Cedric? Cells, yes.
Oui, aux cellules.
Go ahead. Oh,
Les pensées.
Melania? So it goes to all parts of the body.
Dans toutes les parties du corps.
Ignatius? All parts of. Okay, so I don't need to have body. I want something else. You're quite there.
Je veux pas utiliser le mot corps.
Brian? Connects the brain to.
Connecte le cerveau
Someone said something?
à la peau.
Elder Magic said the skin. Someone saying organs.
Certains ont dit le corps, l'organe.
Heart. So we're going to go to the body in a minute.
On va aller dans le corps dans une minute.
What I want to say
Ce que j'aimerais dire,
is that the nerves connect the brain
les nerfs connectent le cerveau
to your environment,
à votre environnement,
which we often call the senses.
que nous appelons souvent les sens.
Some people say the five senses.
Certaines personnes disent donc les cinq sens.
And your senses are what how you relate to everything outside of you.
Et les sens, c'est la façon dont vous vous reliez avec tout ce qui vous entoure.
So that's what the nervous system is in a very basic way.
Voilà le système nerveux dans sa forme la plus basique.
But Magda
Magda
spoke about the parasympathetic
Elle a parlé du parasympathique
and the sympathetic.
et le
The parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. There's two separate systems in our body.
Alors les deux systèmes sympathétiques dans notre système nerveux.
So this is all very complicated, and I'm not an expert on it.
Alors c'est compliqué, mais je ne suis pas un expert sur la question.
But this music
Mais cette musique-là,
that we can create and respond to,
que nous pouvons créer et y répondre,
based upon the frequencies that it interacts with us,
par rapport aux fréquences avec lesquelles il interagit avec nous,
affects the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems that we have.
affecte le système nerveux parasympathique et sympathique.
So this is quite complicated because it's a hormonal response as well.
Alors c'est assez compliqué parce que c'est aussi une réponse hormonale.
So you may not have heard of these terms.
Peut-être que vous n'avez pas entendu parler de ça.
So let's go one step down
Alors allons, descendons d'un niveau
and use words that you're familiar with
et utilisons des mots avec lesquels vous êtes familier,
that relate to these two systems.
qui sont en lien avec ces deux systèmes.
So anyone else except Magda,
Alors quelqu'un d'autre à l'exception de Magda,
because she obviously knows what they are.
parce qu'elle sait ce que c'est.
Anybody?
Alors quelqu'un,
No medical missionaries amongst us?
il n'y a pas de missionnaires médicaux parmi nous.
Okay, no one? Magda? Parasympathetic.
Parasympathetic mode is when
It's
the
really simple.
system is regulated,
Something much simpler than that.
regulated and dysregulated.
This is regulated and this is... Okay, so Magda wants to use dysregulated.
Yes, yes, correct, yes.
Alors elle veut utiliser
She wants to use dysregulate and regulate.
Elle veut utiliser le mot déséquilibré et équilibré.
Curtis, what does the word dys mean?
Ça veut dire quoi, Curtis, 10?
So Curtis said this means not.
Ça veut dire pas.
So you're regulated
Vous êtes régulé,
and you're not regulated.
vous ne l'êtes pas.
I say it respectfully, but I don't think that's particularly helpful.
Et je le dis avec respect, je ne pense pas que ça aide.
Because I think it is regulated, it's just a different type of regulation.
Je pense que c'est régulé, mais c'est un type différent.
Do your searches.
Donc, vous avez suffisamment de temps pour faire vos recherches.
I would imagine. So, Elder Magic says things that you do unconsciously
Alors, l'ancien magique, il dit les choses que vous faites inconsciemment
are related to this.
est en lien avec le parasympathique.
Breathing, blinking of your eye, things you do unconsciously is parasympathetic.
Alors, les choses que vous faites de façon inconsciente, cligner des yeux, etc., respirer, c'est...
Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit
Je vais lire un peu.
to help us along.
Ok.
The sympathetic nervous system. No. The sympathetic nerve, which I have just done now. The sympathetic nervous system is one of two major systems in your body.
Alors, le système nerveux sympathétique est l'un des deux divisions majeures de notre...
And the problem with the two answers that I've received so far
Et le problème avec les deux réponses que j'ai reçues jusque-là,
is both of them are autonomous or automatic. They're not conscious. Both, none of them are.
les deux sont pas conscients, sont automatiques.
So the sympathetic nervous system,
Donc, le système nerveux sympathique,
its function is connected to cortisol
donc une de ces options est connectée à cortisol,
or adrenaline.
l'adrénaline.
So what is that system? Now you should know.
Alors, c'est quoi ce système? Maintenant, vous devriez savoir.
Fight or flight.
C'est fuir ou combattre.
Emma?
Le système sympathique. Alors, se battre, fuir ou bien rester bloqué, quoi. Rester...
That was Fred's for fight, flight or freeze.
Alors, se battre, fuir ou bien geler sur place.
That's what happens when you go into sympathetic mode
C'est ce qui se passe quand on est sur le mode sympathique.
and it's unconscious.
C'est inconscient, hein.
You can't control it.
Vous ne pouvez pas le contrôler.
Happens when you're faced with danger or
C'est quand vous êtes face au danger ou
because none of us are faced with danger.
parce qu'aucun d'entre nous fait face au danger.
Trauma
Trauma,
will put stress
on va mettre le stress
because it covers most things.
parce que ça couvre plusieurs choses.
Stress, trauma, danger.
Le stress, le trauma, le danger.
So the sympathetic nervous system dials up your body, if I can put it that way. It makes your body work faster.
Le système sympathique fait que votre corps fonctionne plus vite.
You breathe faster, your heartbeat goes faster.
Vous respirez plus vite, votre cœur bat plus vite.
Is this a good or bad? Because it says dysregulate. Is this good or bad?
Est-ce bien ou mauvais? Parce qu'il est dit dérégulé.
Okay, on these two,
Sur ces deux-là,
which one does your immune system get better? So people have said your immune system gets worse here.
Donc les gens disent que notre système immunitaire empire avec le sympathique.
Natasha says it gets better on this one.
Et Natacha dit qu'il est mieux sur celui-là.
You're involved in an injury.
Donc vous êtes impliqué dans vous êtes victime, hein.
You're going to get infected.
Vous êtes face à une maladie, vous serez donc infecté.
Your sympathetic nervous system will go into action,
Et votre système sympathique va entrer en action.
and your immune system
Et votre système immunitaire
will go into overdrive
va donc gérer.
to protect you.
Il va vous protéger.
So it's not that straightforward about what is good or bad.
Donc ce n'est pas aussi simple que de dire c'est bon ou mauvais.
They both have their purpose.
Les deux systèmes ont leur but.
So let's talk a little bit about the parasympathetic.
Alors parlons maintenant du parasympathique.
The parasympathetic nervous system
Le système parasympathique
is again one of the two divisions,
est encore l'une des deux divisions majeures.
and the reason why Magda says regulate
La raison pour laquelle Magda a dit réguler,
is because its purpose or function
parce qu'il dit son but, sa fonction,
is to keep the body just working what we might say normally.
c'est de permettre que le corps puisse fonctionner normalement.
So when you think about the parasympathetic nervous system,
Quand nous parlons du système parasympathique,
and if I say
si je dis,
starts in your brain
ça commence dans ton cerveau
and it extends out
et il s'étend
like through long fibers,
à travers les longs fibres,
just like this, starts in your brain, there's long fibers.
comme le schéma là, il y en a beaucoup dans votre cerveau.
Parasympathetic,
Le parasympathique,
I want you to tell me
j'aimerais que vous me dites
where it ends
où il se finit
and the name,
et le nom.
if anybody knows.
Est-ce que quelqu'un sait?
Someone said heart, it's not heart.
Quelqu'un a dit cœur? Non.
No. So it goes to the gut.
Ça va dans l'intestin.
So Sidhu said it goes to the gut, that's correct.
Ça va, Sylvie a dit ça va dans l'intestin, c'est juste.
Its name.
Le nom maintenant.
So Leon? Yeah, Leon said it's the vagus nerve.
Léon a dit que c'est le nerf qu'on appelle le nerf vagus. Le nerf vagus.
It's not the only thing about the parasympathetic, but it's the one that people identify as a parasympathetic system.
Et c'est pas la seule chose dans le système parasympathique, mais c'est ce que certaines personnes identifient dans ce système.
So this system,
Ce système
parasympathetic,
parasympathique
is to keep your body just going through at a normal pace, in a normal way.
permet à votre corps donc de fonctionner d'une façon normale.
It doesn't only go to the gut,
Ça va pas uniquement dans l'intestin,
but there's a strong connection between the two.
mais il y a une connexion forte entre les deux.
And if you think about all the buzzwords, the things that are going around on the internet now,
Et si vous réfléchissez aux choses qui font le buzz sur Internet,
what's this called?
comment cela s'appelle?
So this is the second brain,
C'est le deuxième cerveau.
and some people call this the gut brain axis or connection.
Et certains l'appellent la connexion de l'intestin et du cerveau.
So what happens in the brain,
Ce qui se passe dans le cerveau,
which you all know,
que vous savez tous,
affects your digestion.
affecte votre digestion.
Ellen White will say if you're stressed,
Hélène White va dire si vous êtes stressé,
don't eat.
ne mangez pas.
So we've known about that for a long time.
Nous le savions depuis longtemps.
But as Natasha has just said,
Mais comme Natacha vient de le dire,
what research is now showing
ce que nous montre la recherche,
is that it goes the opposite way too.
ça va aussi d'une façon opposée.
And if you have problems with your gut,
Si vous avez des problèmes avec votre intestin,
without defining what that means,
sans définir ce que c'est,
it affects your brain.
ça va affecter aussi votre cerveau.
I guess this is the latest research that's going on. It's been going on for decades. It's not like last week latest.
Et donc là, c'est des recherches qui ont lieu depuis longtemps. C'est pas quelque chose qui s'est passé maintenant.
But it's an important understanding.
Mais c'est une compréhension importante.
So when you go to an interview
Alors quand vous allez faire un entretien,
or you go for a first date,
que vous allez pour votre premier rendez-vous,
I don't know how they say it in other languages,
je ne sais pas comment c'est dit dans les autres langages,
but in English they say you get butterflies in your stomach.
mais en anglais on dit que vous avez donc des papillons dans l'estomac.
And what is that?
Mais c'est quoi ça?
That's your parasympathetic system
C'est votre système parasympathique
being hurt or we'll say affected
qui sera blessé ou on va dire affecté.
because it's not normal now.
C'est pas normal maintenant.
You're stressed.
Vous êtes stressé,
I might not get the job.
vous allez peut-être pas avoir le travail,
The person may not like me,
peut-être que la personne ne va pas m'aimer,
and it affects your gut.
ça va affecter votre digestion.
So we've all experienced this.
Nous l'avons déjà tous expérimenté.
We all know how it works.
Nous savons comment il fonctionne.
So what we've got,
Ce que nous avons,
and you can see where this is headed.
et nous pouvons voir où ça nous amène.
So if you're going to do, we can't use the bad word, so we'll call it mindfulness.
Donc, on ne peut pas utiliser le mauvais mot, donc on va dire la pleine conscience.
What's the purpose of praying?
Quel est le but donc de la prière?
When Jesus prays all night.
Quand Jésus priait toute la nuit,
Now I know it's to communicate to God,
pour communiquer avec Dieu.
but when Jesus is doing that,
Quand Jésus le fait,
which state is he in?
dans quel état se trouve-t-il?
Parasympathetic or sympathetic?
Parasympathique ou sympathique?
So someone saying sympathetic,
Quel type c'est sympathique?
fight, flight and freeze in his prayers.
Se fuir, rester, se battre ou geler.
Natasha, explain. So when Jesus prays,
Lorsque Jésus priait,
he wants to be less stressed.
il voulait être moins stressé.
So he wants to come on the parasympathetic side.
Donc il voulait aller du côté du système nerveux parasympathique.
That's stress,
Ce stress,
and we'll just say simply this is no stress.
on va le dire simplement, là il n'y a pas de stress.
So in this movement,
Dans ce mouvement,
people struggle with prayer.
les gens luttent avec la
They say it doesn't work.
que ça ne fonctionne pas.
And one of the things that it doesn't work in accomplishing
Une des choses que n'accomplit pas, que ça ne fonctionne pas.
is what Natasha just said.
C'est ce qu'a dit Natacha.
We want to pray
Nous voulons prier,
not just to become rich,
non pas pour devenir riche,
not to get a job or anything.
pour obtenir un travail ou quoi que ce soit d'autre.
Why do we want to pray?
On veut prier pourquoi?
Debbie, why do we want to pray? Less stress.
Pour avoir moins de stress.
We find ourselves in this situation,
Nous trouvons dans cette situation,
a stressful situation,
une situation stressante.
and to get out of that,
Pour en sortir,
we go into our closet
nous allons donc dans notre placard
and we pray to God.
et nous prions à Dieu.
And when we pray to God,
Et lorsque nous prions à Dieu,
we get into a state of mind
nous allons donc entrer dans un état d'esprit
where we have no stress,
où nous n'avons aucun stress.
and so we get into a parasympathetic state.
Nous entrons dans un état parasympathique.
And we think
Et nous pensons
that's good.
que c'est bien.
Why is this good?
Et pourquoi est-ce bien?
Because this state, the parasympathetic state, makes you feel good.
Parce que l'état dans lequel nous met le parasympathique, ça nous permet de nous sentir bien.
We won't say good,
Nous ne dirons pas bien,
we'll say calm.
nous allons dire calme.
So you're calm and you're stressed.
Vous êtes calme dans le parasympathique, vous êtes dans le sympathique.
As I said,
comme je vous l'ai dit,
people complain about prayer
les gens se plaignent de la prière.
because when they pray,
Parce que lorsqu'ils prient,
it doesn't work.
ça ne fonctionne pas.
What is not working?
Mais qu'est-ce qui ne fonctionne pas?
It's not the only thing,
Ce n'est pas la seule chose.
but in our study,
Mais dans notre étude,
it's not getting you out of a stressful situation.
ce n'est pas pour vous sortir d'une situation stressante.
What I'm about to say is not a moral statement.
Ce que je suis sur le point de dire, ce n'est pas une déclaration morale.
It's what every normal person, intelligent person will do.
C'est ce que toutes les personnes normales, intelligentes feront.
If this doesn't work,
Ça ne fonctionne pas.
what would you do?
Qu'est-ce que vous ferez?
You stop doing that
Vous cessez de le faire
and you look
et vous regardez
to find something that will work.
pour trouver quelque chose qui fonctionne.
And what's in vogue now?
Et qu'est-ce qui est en vogue maintenant?
Meditation.
La méditation.
You can't go on the internet and find apps on prayer.
Vous n'allez pas, vous pouvez pas aller sur Internet et trouver un acte de prière.
You go into YouTube
Vous allez sur YouTube
and it's flooded with meditation apps
et c'est inondé par les applications de
because it's in vogue now.
parce que c'est en vogue maintenant.
And people try it,
Et les personnes l'ont essayé.
and what happens?
Et que s'est-il passé?
Cedric said sometimes it doesn't work.
Sylvain dit que parfois ça ne fonctionne pas.
And I'm going to say,
Et je dirais,
when prayer doesn't work,
quand la prière ne fonctionne pas,
why doesn't prayer work?
pourquoi les prières fonctionnent?
So Cedric said something, and I'm going to paraphrase what she said.
Donc Sylvain dit quelque chose et je vais paraphraser ce qu'elle a dit.
Prayer doesn't work
La prière ne fonctionne pas
because you're not doing it properly.
parce que vous ne la faites pas correctement.
And if that's correct,
Et si ça c'est correct,
when you do meditation
quand vous faites la méditation
and it doesn't work,
et que ça ne fonctionne pas,
why doesn't it work?
alors pourquoi ne fonctionne-t-elle pas?
Because you're not doing it properly.
Parce que vous ne le faites pas correctement.
Because mindfulness works,
Parce que la pleine conscience, ça fonctionne.
as does prayer.
Comme la prière.
For some reason,
Pour une raison quelconque,
people in this movement
les personnes de ce mouvement
find it easier
ont trouvé plus facile
to work out the rules of mindfulness
de trouver les règles de la pleine conscience
than they do the rules of prayer.
qu'elles le font pour les règles de la prière.
So this is not a study about prayer,
Ce n'est pas une étude sur la prière,
but it's to demonstrate
mais c'est pour démontrer
the validity of what?
la validité, mais de quoi?
Of the methodology that we're using.
De la méthodologie que nous utilisons.
Because I think I've now spoken on 3, maybe 4 subjects that are using the same methodology.
Parce que je crois que je l'ai mentionné 3 fois, mais il y a 4 sujets qui montrent le sujet de la méthodologie.
Okay, so we've got all the answers now about good and bad music.
Donc nous avons toutes les réponses là sur la bonne ou mauvaise musique.
Almost.
Presque.
So what is good music?
Alors qu'est-ce qu'est une bonne musique?
What is a good prayer?
Qu'est-ce qu'une bonne prière?
What is a good meditation session?
Qu'est-ce qu'une bonne session de méditation?
Good music,
La bonne musique,
we might call it religious,
vous pouvez l'appeler religieuse.
is music that does what?
C'est une musique qui produit quoi?
Calms you down,
Qui vous calme,
brings you into a parasympathetic state.
qui vous met dans un état parasympathique.
Bad music
La mauvaise musique,
is one that puts you into a sympathetic state.
c'est une musique qui vous met dans un état sympathique.
But
Mais
if we call this good and bad,
si nous appelons ça bien et mauvais,
I'm sorry to say it this way,
je suis désolée de l'exprimer de cette
we made the same mistake.
vous commettrez la même erreur.
Where's the mistake here?
Elle est où l'erreur là?
Where's the mistake? Or bad terminology?
Ou quelle est la mauvaise terminologie?
It's this idea of dysregulation.
C'est cette idée-là de dérégulation.
What we should say is different regulation.
On devrait dire plutôt une régulation différente.
So sometimes,
Parfois,
I think Ignatius said this,
je crois que c'est Ignatius qui l'a dit.
you want to listen to bad music.
Vous voulez écouter de la mauvaise musique.
You want to listen to music
Vous voulez écouter de la musique
that puts you into a bad state.
qui te met dans un état mauvais.
But it's not bad.
Et ce n'est pas mauvais.
It's just because this means bad.
Parce que dysrégulé, ça veut dire mauvais.
We just want to put diff, like dysregulation. It's a new word. If we can begin to understand how music affects us, and we can start thinking about the two systems that basically control or govern you, puts you into these two states. This is not bad, it's different. And sometimes it's good to be there. So, does anybody have any questions thus far? Or objections to using these kind of principles to try to understand the difference between good and bad? Okay, I'll try to, with me or you? I'm talking. One moment. Okay, I'm all fixed up now. So, does anybody have any questions on this methodology, its validity, that it's perhaps wrong, or do they have any questions? Curtis. Oh, Andreas. Question or critique? Question. So when I say methodology, can I describe the methodology? So I've based it upon a principle that we're constructed in a certain way. Then I've given some evidence that the universe, including us, is constructed on some kind of principle. I've called it frequencies. And then I've said we have two states, parasympathetic and sympathetic. And though I may not have made it clear, both are affected by frequencies. So I went to the subject of food, and what I said was this, that when you look at these two nations and how they view, we'll say some health rule, instead of keeping it in the dominion of the health department, because in this environment, who is the health department? The priest. Who are the teachers? The priest. Who are the police force? The priest. Who's the government? The priest. Who are the judges? The priest. So they're the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judiciary. So what ends up happening, some truth gets labeled with religion. And we could see that here, in this hypothetical example. Then I offered one that really does happen, that you might not agree with. And if you don't agree with me, we'll end up having a debate about your prejudices, and I'll try to show you The reason you don't agree here
même si vous n'êtes pas d'accord ici,
is because you don't understand this concept.
parce que vous ne comprenez pas ce concept,
Because they're identical.
parce qu'ils sont identiques.
And the only difference is one is real and one is make believe.
Et un concept est vrai et l'autre c'est quelque chose qu'on croit.
So hopefully
Donc j'espère
you can see methodology there as you compare and contrast.
que vous pourrez voir la méthodologie là, vous comparez, vous contrastez.
Then all I did,
Tout ce que j'ai fait
without putting it on the board,
en le plaçant au tableau,
is just put music and music.
c'est de mettre musique et musique.
And I'm saying
Et je suis en train de dire
the Philistines
que les Philistins
worked out
ont découvert
frequencies
la fréquence
that were healthful.
qui était bénéfique.
And they wanted to have their population live long.
Et ils ont voulu que leur population vive longtemps.
They said, live long and prosper.
Ils ont dit, ben, vivez longtemps et prospérez.
Ring the bells.
Faites sonner la cloche.
The only place you can do that is at the temple.
Et le seul endroit où vous pouvez le faire, c'est au temple.
And so the Israelites
Alors les Israélites
say that music
ont dit que cette musique,
is pagan.
elle est païenne.
And I think through methodology I've proven
Et je pense que par rapport à la méthodologie prouvée,
that it is healthful.
que c'est sain.
And the reason the Israelites disagree with it,
Et la raison pour laquelle les Israélites ne sont pas du même avis,
when they do the same thing,
ils font les mêmes choses.
is because for the Philistines it has religious connotations to it.
Les Philistins, il y a une connotation religieuse à qui est attachée.
So, if I was a patriarchal Israelite
Si j'étais un patriarche israélite
3,000 years ago,
il y a 3000 ans,
and I said,
et je dis,
I don't want my son
je ne souhaite pas que mon fils
marrying a Philistine,
se marie à une Philistine,
all I have to say is,
ce que je dois dire, c'est
no pork eating in my family.
il n'y a pas de mangeur de porc dans ma famille.
Because the Philistines
Parce que les Philistins
are expert chefs
sont des experts, des chefs
in pork.
dans le porc.
And they don't know how to cook anything else.
Ils ne savent pas cuisiner autre chose d'autre.
So it's just a mechanism
Donc c'est juste un mécanisme
to keep my bloodline pure.
pour garder ma lignée pure,
We could say that in a really nice way if we wanted to.
d'une façon plus gentille.
So that's my defense of this methodology.
C'est ma défense de cette méthode.
It's not going all the way through.
On ne va pas aller jusqu'au bout.
It's stopped around here, I'm guessing.
Et c'est fini là, je pense.
Because we all know
Nous savons tous
vegetables and fries affect your body.
que les légumes et les frites affectent votre corps.
We demonstrated it here,
On l'a démontré ici,
if we want to call it demonstration.
si vous voulez l'appeler démonstration.
And then I said,
Ensuite, j'ai dit,
using the same methodology,
en utilisant la même méthodologie,
we think we have a secret weapon
nous pensons avoir une arme secrète.
into Eden,
Et Eden,
that we have a special tool
nous avons un outil spécial
to investigate science
pour investiguer la science
with diet.
avec l'alimentation.
But we do the same thing with music.
Et nous faisons la même chose avec la
And I'm just trying to demonstrate,
Je veux juste essayer de démontrer,
because I'm not talking about food,
et on ne parle pas d'alimentation.
the rules don't seem to work when it comes to music.
Les règles ne semblent pas fonctionner lorsqu'on parle du sujet de la musique.
Because I use food to show that it doesn't work.
Parce que j'ai utilisé l'exemple de la nourriture pour montrer que ça ne fonctionne pas.
Because in this model, there's this idea of bad food is connected to religion, and so is music.
Donc dans ce modèle, la mauvaise alimentation est connectée au religieux. Il en est de même pour la musique.
So after I'd done that,
Une fois que je l'ai fait,
I then said,
ensuite j'ai dit,
let me offer an alternative system,
laissez-moi vous offrir un système alternatif,
an alternative belief system
sur un système de croyance alternative.
of how to look at good and bad music.
Comment considérer la bonne ou la mauvaise musique.
And that's when I went on to these systems.
C'est la raison pour laquelle je suis rentré dans ces deux systèmes.
So I don't know if that answered that question.
Donc je ne sais pas si ça répond à la question.
Probably not to your satisfaction, I'm sure.
Peut-être pas à ta satisfaction, je suis sûr.
Curtis.
So when you spoke about the regulation and the dysregulation,
Quand tu parles de la régulation et de la dérégulation,
So when I spoke about the two types of regulation,
quand je parle des deux types
Is it valid to view things as being subjective or objective instead of objective?
Alors, est-il valide de voir le sujet sous la forme subjective ou objective?
Because to use Andres and myself as examples,
To use people as examples,
Pour utiliser les gens en tant qu'exemple,
where I need to go into a parasympathetic mode, I would
I'm going to stop Curtis here because I'm not sure what the question that you're asking. It's getting too complicated, so I'm not going to translate it.
is it subjective?
So I haven't finished. Let me finish my thoughts.
donc j'ai pas, on va pas traduire la question de Curtis parce qu'elle devient compliquée. Il va finir sa pensée.
Because the question is this some universal law, political, or is it more subjective or individual?
Donc est-ce que c'est une loi politique subjective ou moins
So what I want to suggest,
ce que je souhaite suggérer
when we talk about music being innate, built into our bodies, when we speak about music being innate, built into us,
quand on parle de la musique comme innée,
just like breathing is,
tout comme le fait de respirer,
the reason it's inbuilt,
la raison pour laquelle c'est en nous,
a very childish explanation,
une explication vraiment enfantine,
is because of it's a frequency,
parce que c'est une fréquence,
and our body is constructed upon frequencies.
parce que notre corps est construit sur la fréquence.
So that's the connection.
C'est la connexion.
In our previous study,
Dans notre étude précédente,
we spoke about syncopation.
ah oui, on a parlé de la syncopée.
So syncopation
Donc la syncopée,
is when you expect something in a particular order
c'est quand tu attends à quelque chose d'un ordre particulier, dans un ordre particulier,
and it's not given in that order.
et que cela n'est pas donné dans cet ordre.
And that's called syncopation.
Et cela est appelé syncopée.
So I could give a dictionary definition, but I think that's a reasonable working model.
Et je pense que c'est, j'aurais pu vous donner une définition du dictionnaire, mais ça, je pense que c'est un modèle qui fonctionne.
So I use the word expect.
Donc on a utilisé le mot on attend.
So this is going to at least address partly Curtis's question.
Je pense que ça répond partiellement à la question de Curtis.
So if we were to listen to a piece of music,
Si on veut écouter un morceau de musique,
would we all know
nous savons tous,
intuitively,
de façon intuitive,
without instruction,
sans instruction,
if something was non-syncopated or syncopated?
si quelqu'un ou quelque chose est sympathique ou non.
So in a different setting, I would do an experiment to test you.
Si on était dans un contexte différent, j'aurais fait une expérimentation une expérience pour vous tester,
But we won't.
mais on ne le fera pas.
I'm suggesting
Je suggère,
enough research has been done
suffisamment de recherches ont été faites
that I'll say the majority of people, not all people,
et je dis la majorité des gens, si ce n'est pas tout,
when they listen to a piece of music, they know if it's syncopated or not.
et quand la personne écoute la musique, elle sait si c'est sympathique ou pas.
We'll say they have a feeling,
On va dire, ok, elle a un feeling,
they have an awareness,
elle a une conscience,
they have a sense.
il y a un sens.
So go onto YouTube
Allez sur YouTube
afterwards
après
and test it.
et testez-le.
You'll see experiments being done about syncopation and non-syncopation.
Donc vous allez voir si la musique elle est syncopée ou pas. Syncope ou pas.
There are different types of syncopation. We're not discussing that.
Donc il y a plusieurs types de syncope. C'est pas ce dont on parle.
So what I want to suggest
Que j'aimerais suggérer,
is if we all have an awareness that a particular piece of music is syncopated,
alors si on a donc une conscience, une prise de conscience que certains types de musique est du style syncopé,
then it's not subjective
ce n'est pas subjectif.
because we all have an awareness of it.
Parce que nous avons tous une conscience.
Now there may be the odd piece, 10%, that we disagree on,
Il y a peut-être 10% sur ceux que nous ne sommes pas d'accord.
but simple syncopation
Mais donc une syncope
simple syncopation, which is the foundation of a piece of music,
qui est donc le fondement d'un morceau de musique,
I think
je pense,
everybody can tell.
tout le monde peut le dire.
You have a sense in it. You have an ear.
On a une oreille, on ressent quoi.
Can be trained.
On peut être formé.
So this idea of expectation
Donc cette idée d'attente
is related to the concept of syncopation.
est reliée au concept de la syncope.
So when you listen to a piece of music,
Quand vous écoutez un morceau de musique,
you expect it to go from, I'm going to call it, is it one note, from one note to the next.
vous attendez à passer d'une note à une autre.
And based upon what note A is, number one,
Tout dépend ce qu'est la note numéro 1.
when you listen to number 2
Quand vous écoutez à la note numéro 2
and then 3,
et ensuite 3,
you'll know if they're done in the correct order.
vous savez si cela est fait dans le bon ordre.
That means it's not syncopated.
Donc ça veut dire que la musique n'est pas syncopée.
And as soon as you syncopate it,
Et dès qu'elle est syncopée,
which means you put it out of order,
ça veut dire que vous la mettez en dehors de son ordre.
you pick it up.
Donc vous prenez,
You have an awareness.
donc vous comprenez et vous avez donc une prise de conscience.
Now, when I say out of order, I'm giving a very simplistic way of explaining it.
Et quand je dis c'est dans le désordre, c'est une façon très simpliste de l'expliquer.
Because it's about where the emphasis is.
Parce que ça porte sur là où est placé l'emphase, l'accent.
And what happens
Ce qui se passe,
is when you listen to syncopated music,
quand vous regardez, vous écoutez de la musique syncope,
which is not what you expect,
la musique syncopée, ce n'est pas ce que vous attendez,
it's not regulated,
ce n'est pas régulé,
it's, we'll say, dysregulated,
c'est dérégulé.
it puts you into what state?
Ça vous place dans quel état?
Puts you into a sympathetic state.
Ça vous met dans un état sympathique.
And if it was non-syncopated,
Et si la musique elle n'est pas syncopée,
it puts you into parasympathetic.
ça vous met dans l'état du parasympathique.
So it's not to do with a particular genre.
Non, sympathique c'est l'English.
It's not to do with a particular genre, a type of music. Genre is a French word, I think. But it's my pronunciation. Like jazz, classical, there's different genres. It's not to do with the different type of musics there are.
Ça n'a rien à voir avec les différents types de musique.
So you can't say jazz music is bad
Donc on ne peut pas dire que le jazz est mauvais,
and classical is good,
que le classique c'est bon.
because there are plenty of places in classical music that are syncopated.
Parce qu'il y a plusieurs endroits dans le classique, plusieurs styles de musique classique qui sont de la musique syncopée.
And there are enough hymns
Et il y a suffisamment de hymnes
that we could pick out,
que nous pouvons prendre
both in the music and the words,
à la fois dans la musique et les paroles
that are syncopated,
qui sont donc syncopées,
which would put you in a sympathetic mode,
qui va vous mettre dans un mode sympathique.
which apparently is not good.
Apparemment, ce n'est pas bon.
So, what I want to suggest
Ce que je veux suggérer,
as we close
alors que nous clôturons,
is not to think of Christian music and worldly music,
n'est pas quelque chose de dire la musique chrétienne ou mondaine,
or godly and satanic,
ou pieuse ou satanique,
but it's music that puts you into a parasympathetic or a sympathetic state.
c'est la musique qui vous place dans un état parasympathique ou dans un état sympathique.
And if you're in the gym
Et si vous êtes au club de gym,
lifting a 200 kilogram weight and doing a deadlift,
et vous soulevez 200 kilos, un poids de 200 kilos,
which is extremely dangerous,
c'est très dangereux.
what type of music do you want to be listening to?
Alors, dans quel type de musique que vous voulez écouter?
Bad music,
La mauvaise musique,
which is not bad,
c'est pas mauvais.
but you want to listen to music that has a strong beat, but it's very syncopated.
Vous voulez vraiment écouter
When you get home,
Quand vous rentrez à la maison,
what do you want to do?
qu'est-ce que vous voulez faire?
You want to calm down,
Vous voulez vous calmer,
change music.
changer de musique.
So, the music that you listen to,
La musique que vous allez écouter,
we've not discussed words. We have not discussed words.
pas des mots,
We're talking about the instruments.
on parle de l'instrument,
Depends upon its function, what you want it to do.
basé sur sa fonction, ce que vous voulez faire.
And most of your time,
Et la plupart de votre temps,
unless you want to burn out,
à moins que vous voulez disjoncter,
literally,
littéralement,
you want to be in the parasympathetic state.
si vous voulez être, donc vous souhaitez être dans un état parasympathique.
And therefore, most of the music that you listen to
Donc la plupart des musiques que vous écoutez
should be calming music,
devraient être donc des musiques calmes,
which doesn't have to be 100% non-syncopated, but it should be non-syncopated music mostly.
donc ça ne doit pas être des musiques syncopées à 100%, mais plus ou moins syncopées.
And so I'm hoping that we can begin to use some rules
Et j'espère que nous pourrions être en mesure d'utiliser certaines règles
that are more useful,
qui pourraient être plus utiles,
more pragmatic
pragmatiques,
than using labels
que d'utiliser des étiquettes.
as good or good and bad.
Des étiquettes telles que bon ou mauvais.
So I'm not promoting anything.
Je ne suis pas en train de promouvoir quoi que ce soit.
By now,
Maintenant, là,
I'm assuming at least half of you
donc dès maintenant, je présume que la moitié d'entre vous
know about noise.
connaît ce qu'est le bruit.
So you know about noise cancelling headphones.
Alors vous savez, comment ça s'appelle? Le bruit dans les écouteurs.
And you know how they work.
Vous savez comment ça fonctionne.
So noise cancelling headphones
Alors le fait de couper le bruit dans nos écouteurs
do not work well
ne fonctionne pas bien
with syncopated music
avec la musique syncopée.
because the algorithm that it uses is based upon some kind of rule.
Parce que l'algorithme sur lequel il est basé se sert de certaines règles.
What's one of the most syncopated genres that there is? Jazz. Everybody knows it's jazz.
Ok, tout le monde sait que c'est le jazz.
Because its whole style
Parce que c'est un style.
is that you actually do the music in real time. You create it.
Vous faites la musique en réel, en temps réel, vous la créez.
And so, noise cancelling headphones don't work too well
Alors la coupure du bruit dans les écouteurs ne fonctionne pas très bien
when there's a set rhythm.
quand il y a un rythme établi.
So one of the things that are quite common now,
Alors une des choses qui est assez commun maintenant,
it began with this, but it's not the only one,
ça commence avec ça, mais ce n'est pas le seul,
is white noise.
c'est le bruit blanc.
And I'm guessing half of you know what white noise is.
Et je pense que la moitié d'entre vous, vous savez ce que c'est.
So white noise
Donc le white noise,
is just random noise.
c'est du bruit au hasard.
And this randomness
Et ce bruit au hasard
puts you into a parasympathetic mode.
vous met dans un mode parasympathique.
And if you're familiar with white noise,
Si vous êtes familier avec le white noise,
you know that there are other types.
vous savez donc qu'il y a d'autres types.
Brown, green, black, it has all these color codes to
Il y
them.
a tous ces codes de couleurs, noir, vert, rouge,
But they're all the same thing.
mais sont tous la même chose.
Okay, so as we close,
Alors que nous terminons,
try to answer the question fairly as best as I could.
j'essaie de répondre à la question aussi juste que je peux.
On listening to worldly music. Try to answer the question about listening to worldly music.
Donc je suis en train d'essayer de répondre à la question sur le fait d'écouter de la musique mondiale.
And the conclusion is
La conclusion c'est
that there is no such thing as bad music,
qu'il n'y a pas une telle chose comme mauvaise musique,
but music makes you feel differently.
mais la musique vous fait vous sentir différemment.
And it puts you into these two states, parasympathetic and sympathetic,
Cela vous met dans l'un de ces deux états, le parasympathique ou le sympathique,
So there are rules.
il y a des règles.
You can't just listen to anything.
Vous ne pouvez pas faire ce que vous voulez.
You should spend most of your time in a parasympathetic state for health.
Et pour votre santé, vous allez vous retrouver la plupart de votre temps dans le parasympathique.
You might not like this,
Peut-être que vous n'allez pas l'aimer,
but not for religion.
mais ce n'est pas pour la religion.
You do it for health.
Vous le faites pour la santé.
And you pray,
Vous priez
I'm going to argue, for health as well.
pour, je vais dire aussi pour la santé.
And when we say health,
Et quand nous disons santé,
it's not just the gut,
ce n'est pas uniquement l'intestin,
it's the mind.
c'est l'esprit.
It's not just about the body,
Ce n'est pas uniquement
it's about your mental health.
mais c'est aussi votre santé mentale.
If you want to keep in health,
Et si vous voulez rester en santé,
you need to follow,
il vous faut donc suivre,
however badly it's put,
même si c'est expliqué d'une mauvaise façon,
what the vows teach.
ce qu'enseignent les veaux.
Don't listen to worldly music.
N'écoutez pas la musique mondaine.
It's a fair approximation to the truth.
C'est une approximation assez juste de la vérité.
It's not accurate.
Ce n'est pas juste.
And I think this is a better way to explain it.
Et je pense que la façon dont on l'a expliqué, elle est préférable.
The problem with that rule,
Et le problème avec cette règle,
the way the vows worded,
la façon dont les vœux l'ont exprimé,
it says you're never allowed to go into sympathetic mode.
c'est que on l'a exprimé d'une façon que vous n'êtes pas autorisé à aller dans le mode sympathique
Through the vehicle of music.
au travers de la musique.
And I think I've just shown that it's legitimate and sometimes it's good to do that.
Et je crois que je viens de vous montrer qu'il est légitime et parfois il est bon de le faire.
Let's pray. Dear Lord, we thank you for your mercy and goodness. I ask and pray that you would guide each of us in our understanding and pursuit of the truth. As we come to the close of this camp meeting, I ask for a special blessing upon those who were able to come and those who were able to join online. As we study a subject that is intimately connected to our humanity, to our health, mental, emotional and physical, when we discuss the subject of music, it's my hope and our prayer that we would each have a better understanding of how to discern between that which is good and that which is not. In Jesus' name, Amen.